Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that Ukrainians, after they were defeated in the Zaporozhye area and after they got significant losses, took a decision to launch another wave of mobilization. Currently the Russian sources are calling this like a total mobilization. Yesterday the Ukrainians have already announced the total mobilization in Ivano-Frankovsk region. This is the Ivano-Frankovsk area. This region is located in the western part of Ukraine. Another announcement took place in Kyiv, and today the Chernihiv announced about their own mobilization, total mobilization. So currently at least three regions in Ukraine have announced about the beginning of the total mobilization. Yesterday, if you remember, the Ukrainians made another attack against the Crimea bridges that connects Crimea with the Zaporozhye area, and today the Russian sources published the video of that attack. As you can see, the Storm Shadow missiles strike exactly the bridge, and right after that the Russians, those attacks on the Crimea bridges were made not by the systems on the ground. Those attacks were made by the Ukrainian Air Forces, and the Russians are saying that those attacks were made from the airfields in Khmelnytsky and in Starokonstantinovka, and those were the forces of 7th Aviation Brigade, and this aviation brigade has a Su-24 that are modernized and that they can use to launch the Storm Shadow missiles. So basically the Ukrainians were using these forces and these airfields to attack the Russians, and during the previous night the Russians made another missile attack against these airfields. We are expecting some updates from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation during upcoming report, and I believe and I expect that they will tell us that they managed to destroy air forces and aircrafts on those airfields during the previous night. Now we are moving to the situation on the ground. The Ukrainians continue small storming operations all over the combat line, but not so heavy as we saw at the beginning of this counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians continue attacking from Orechov, from Gulyai-Polye, from Charivne. So the Ukrainians continue doing attempts to attack the Russians' positions from, let's call it, this line, and all those attacks were repelled by the Russians. For example, today the Russians reported that the Ukrainians made another attack upon the Russian position somewhere at 7:30 a.m. of the local time. There were at least three waves of attacks. The Russians managed to repel them, and at least one tank was destroyed and one artillery system was destroyed as well. When talking about Petykhatki, there were no changes during the previous night. Ukrainians continue accumulation of their forces. They're getting more and more forces to these northern part of these northern farms. The Ukrainians managed to create small fortifications. Currently they're trying to develop these fortifications. They're trying to get deeper in the ground, and if the Russians are not able to push them back within the next few days, of course it will be very difficult to do it later. Now we're moving further. We're going to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Ukrainians made a few continue attacking the Russian positions in the vicinity of Makarovka, in direction of Priyutna, and of course in direction of Novodonetsk. And all those attacks were repelled by the Russians. The Russians also published the video showing that they controlled the settlement by the name of Urozhaine, because there were some talks and rumors that the Ukrainians were managed to push the Russians back from the settlement, but the Russians published a very fresh video. Furthermore, the Russians reported that after the repel attack in the vicinity of Novodonetsk, currently exactly at these seconds of the local time, the Russians launched their own counter-offensive operation along this river, trying to encircle and to force the Ukrainian forces who are currently located on the fields to step back and to retreat towards Velika Novoselovka. When talking about Donetsk and about Artyomovsk, there were no changes, just regular artillery duels, and a lot of updates as usually currently are coming from Siversk Liman bridgehead. Today some Western mappers confirms that the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead a little bit to the south from Sporne, on the north of Berestova, and on the south of Sporne. So basically during the previous days the Russians managed to establish control over these fields and over the trenches and on this territory. So as you can see, the Russians continue advancing, and their main purpose is to ruin and to reduce the Ukrainian logistics between settlements like Vesyola, Vimka, Ivano-Daryevka, and of course Sporne. There are very heavy clashes on the Kryminaya forest. The Russians published the video of fierce fightings in the trenches between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces. And yesterday and today, this morning, we start receiving very, very bad updates for the Ukrainians. The Russians reported, and a lot of sources from the Russian side have already reported that during the previous days of fierce fightings on this front line, the Ukrainians' 42nd Mechanized Brigade was completely defeated and destroyed. This 42nd Mechanized Brigade is the brigade that was trained with the Western countries. Mainly they were trained in Slovakia, I believe in the Eastern and Southern Europe, Central Europe, and that brigade was completely erased from the map. So for now we will keep this brigade on this bridgehead, but the Russians are saying that they would defeat this a fresh brigade that were sent by the Ukrainians to the combat line. Probably they thought that they can change the situation, but they couldn't even compete with the forces like 25th Airborne Brigade Ukrainian, or 66, or was 95th or 63rd on the north. Yes, they even couldn't compete with this one, 95th Air Assault Brigade. They were just demolished, destroyed, and so on, and that's why the Ukrainians were forced to replace these forces of 42nd Mechanized Brigade with the force of 95th Brigade. So basically, situation for the Ukrainians are very difficult on this bridgehead. Furthermore, some Western analytics have already published their own analysis of the situation in Kryminaya Forest, publishing their own map and so on. And basically, I'm not saying that this is really correct information, but anyway, based on this map, we see that there are differences between our understanding of the situation and with understanding of some Western analytics. And basically, based on this map, we see that there's a lot of differences. For example, in the vicinity of Kryminaya Forest, and based on that map, Dibrova and the small settlement Kuzmino is in the gray zone or under Ukrainian control. This part of the forest is under Ukrainian control, but basically, if you take a look at this map one more time, we see that during the previous days, the Russians launched their counter-offensive operation, and as a result of that, they managed to capture, based on this map, the territory, like this small salient, and they managed to push the Ukrainian forces right to this river, to the line of settlements Makeivka, Nevskaya, Terny, Zarechная. So for now, we don't have any updates or confirmations from the Russian side. Currently, this territory is covered with the fog of war, because a lot of important updates are taking place there currently, and basically the Russians, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, want to keep everything in silent, at least until they are able to solve and to win this battle and to push the Ukrainians to step back from this bridgehead. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.